It was preventable now. I've learned to, I believe this in my heart, that this could have been prevented.
Demanding action. Could the state put our lives at risk on Interstate 10? Our KOLD Investigates team shines a spotlight on one man's fight after losing those he loved most.
We had 3.5 million people coming through here a year. And just mathematically, there are going to be some people who don't behave appropriately.
Multiple federal agencies keep you safe when traveling. But what happens if someone acts out of line? What our KOLD Investigates team uncovered about unruly passengers and the punishments they don't face.
My vehicle in the past has been searched twice, without my consent.
An eye-opening investigation at the border. Our KOLD Investigates team breaks down the barriers to expose what's really happening at immigration checkpoints.
I was just like, I'm just going to kill myself to get out of here.
We'll take you back to our investigation into the worst psychiatric hospital in the state, with the stories to prove it, and the alarming information we are still learning.
Honestly, that's one of the things we feel really bad about. We do not want to be putting children in danger.
Watch out who you give your money to. What our KOLD Investigates team uncovered about one group claiming to fundraise for foster children.
We know our environment, and we know that we have a high risk for suicide.
But why? Our KOLD Investigates team takes you behind bars at the Pima County Jail to find out why so many inmates are taking their own lives. Plus, what it could be costing you.
KOLD News 13 presents an Investigate special. Here now your hosts, Craig Thomas, Wendy Redmond, and Craig Reck.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for a special presentation from our KOLD Investigates team.
An in-depth look at some of the most impactful and important stories our team uncovered this past year.
And in many of these stories, our work hasn't stopped. We're following up and learning brand new information. And in some cases, our investigations are inspiring change. We start tonight with our investigation about your safety when you're driving on our busiest highway. Would barriers along I-10 make the road safer?
It's actually safer not to have a barrier. A barrier is a hazard.
It's a highway many of us drive every day, Interstate 10. It's also one that sees deadly crossover crashes. But could some of these be prevented? Victims' families and the courts say yes. ADOT told me no. It is lives and millions of dollars of taxpayer money in the balance.
I've promised them I'm not going to give up.
Mike Humphrey made a promise to his wife Pam and sister Ann to make Arizona's highways safer. He made the promise after they were killed in a brutal crossover crash on I-10 in 2008. Pam lost control after swerving to avoid something on the road. Her car crossed over the median and slammed head-on into a semi.
It was the worst day of my life and my son's life because it came right out of the blue. I mean, I'd kissed him goodbye that morning, and I'll say, see you this afternoon, you know, just like you go to Phoenix, you come home, but my life just, it was shattering.
The shattering didn't stop. Mike's brother-in-law, Ann's husband, couldn't pick up the pieces after the crash. He ultimately committed suicide several years later.
He might as well have been in the car, because when he lost my sister, he kind of just sort of gave up.
Now, 10 years later, white crosses remembering Pam and Ann still stand along Highway 10 on mile 171. And Humphrey's still fighting to put something else in the middle of that road, cable median barriers. He says they would have prevented the deaths of his wife and sister and would keep other drivers from suffering the same fate.
If you're going down the road and God willing, we have cables, and you hit that cable, yeah, your car's going to get kind of scratched up and messed up, but you know what? You're going to get out of that car alive.
A jury agreed with Humphrey in 2016, ordering ADOT to pay $40 million, concluding it should have installed barriers because there was evidence that stretch of I-10 had a history of crossover crashing. During the trial, Humphrey presented evidence of 11 previous crossover crashes on the same 10-mile stretch of I-10 in the 5 years before Pam and Ann died. You often hear people say lawsuits aren't about the money. But this letter Humphrey had his attorney sent to the state before the trial started shows what was most important to him. Humphrey offered to settle and receive no money if ADOT would just put 1 mile of cable barrier at mile marker 171. The cost, about $200,000.
It's never been about money. It really has not been about money. It's about getting these cables in the ground.
Are you amazed by ADOT's reaction throughout this process?
I am. I'm amazed at their adversarial take on this kind of stuff. I would think they'd want to work with victim families.
The Glazers are another victim family. A jury awarded them $8 million after a crash killed a father and daughter, also on Mile 171, just 9 months before the Humphrey crash. That's about $50 million in taxpayer money, with other lawsuits still working their way through the courts. The cost to put the barriers along the entire stretch of I-10 between Tucson and Phoenix would be about $12 million.
We recognize that the juries have spoken, but we've got to do what's safest for the greater good.
Steve Boshin is ADOT's assistant director. He says what multiple juries ruled as negligence, in fact, puts safety first.
Would barriers along I-10 make the road safer?
It's actually safer not to have a barrier. A barrier is a hazard, and we end up with a pinball effect if we had a barrier out there, and I would be creating more harm than good with the 10 million safe passages of vehicles that we have between Phoenix and Tucson in the area that you're asking about.
Many other states claim cable barriers do much more good than harm. I looked at Department of Transportation websites from states all over the country. Many specifically advertise the cable medians on their roads save lives. Boshin says those statements don't apply to I-10 in Arizona.
ADOT claims it's the amount of space in the median, the actual distance between one side of the highway and the other, that makes it so that putting in a median barrier would be the wrong thing and the dangerous thing to do.
In a lot of the states that you probably heard about where they have a median of 30 or 40 feet. Here, where you have a 75-foot or wider median, the intention is to have the wide recovery area so that a car can slowly slow down, stop, recover, and then get back on safely.
I also asked why not do a pilot program, just 1 mile of barrier to see if it works.
If we did do a pilot, the challenge is we would end up being sued because we didn't follow national guidance. We get sued by the same attorneys that sue us for not having a barrier as if we did have a barrier.
Humphrey maintains the issue isn't about lawsuits, it's about safety.
What will it mean to you if cables do end up getting in the ground?
Everything. It'll mean that, they didn't die in vain.
Pima County Supervisor Steve Christie watched that story, and as a result, he wrote a letter to ADOT asking them to change their policy when it comes to median barriers, or at least explain what it is that they're doing. I spoke to his office, and they said so far ADOT has not responded. But it's not just your safety on our roads. We also investigated your safety in the air.
Your travel plans could fall apart if just one person on board flies off the handle. Federal agencies can punish those people, but my investigation found the FAA, the FBI, and the TSA all passed on a handful of cases at Tucson International Airport, meaning it's left to the local police.
We had 3.5 million people coming through here a year, and just mathematically, there are going to be some people who don't behave appropriately.
Some, for our purposes, is only 4 in the last 4 years. None of them viral like so many of the videos that make headlines. Still, the chief of public safety for Tucson Airport Authority takes notice.
We learn from watching some of these videos ourselves and say, well, what could have gone better? What would we have done differently? And that's helpful to us.
Police reports show pilots had to divert 2 of the 4 flights that required a police response at Tucson International. One of them needed an F-16 escort because of a report of someone with a gun on board.
It's a big issue that could potentially close the airport.
The other involved a passenger pounding on the cockpit door trying to get in. By the time police boarded that flight, other passengers had restrained him to his seat.
When you're stuck in an aircraft with somebody who is behaving inappropriately or is perhaps dangerous, it is much more frightening because you can't leave. You're stuck there. And we always try to take that into consideration and whether we're going to arrest somebody or not because of what they did.
Stay right there, sit back. Step back,
Neither of the passengers responsible for those diverted flights faced punishment. The guy with the gun was all made up by someone having a mental health issue. That's his guardian talking with police. The other diverted flight was so recent, the guy lunging at the cockpit hasn't appeared in any court records since it happened. The other 2 unruly passengers were already bound for Tucson, and both left the airport with misdemeanor charges. One already had it quashed, the other faces an outstanding balance of just $50.
It doesn't mean that the person got away scot-free. A misdemeanor arrest on an aircraft means something. It means something to the TSA. So they notice things like that. They recognize that somebody was unruly on an aircraft, and maybe they're not going to be so happy with them anymore.
Since this story originally aired, I've heard from someone on one of those flights. He tells me he was stunned to find out that local police were the only ones to hold that unruly passenger responsible.
Wow, some really powerful images there, and I'm sure a lot of folks are at home thinking, why wasn't more done with all of this?
That was part of our question here, Wendy, is that there's so many different agencies here. You've got the TSA, the FAA, the FBI, then the local police. They all work together on situations like this, but they also have their own independent investigations if they want to press charges or citations, anything like that. And in all of these cases that we saw at Tucson International Airport, they said, nope, it does not hit the threshold to get us involved.
Just wasn't enough.
Not enough. The FBI responded to some of these scenes, but in the end they said, nope, there's not enough here for us. If you look at the FAA overall, they track unruly passengers. Since 2012, their numbers have dropped as far as who they cited, who they charged. So overall, maybe the skies are safer, there's less of these people, but when it comes to Tucson International, we know local police can only do so much. They handle their jurisdiction. Everything else is left to the feds. So the chief insists that Tucson International is a safe place to work, safe place to fly, and he encourages more people to do it.
All right, and that answers the question as to why it looks like to us, or a lot of folks at home,
a slap on the wrist.
It wasn't that much done. All right. Well, Craig, thanks so much.
Angered, frustrated, annoyed, and I will tell anybody that's willing to listen that I'm opposed to it.
Customs and Border Protection claim that a key element to border security actually happens miles away from this border. They're the immigration checkpoints that we drive through all the time in southern Arizona. Do those actually work? Next, when the KOLD Investigates special continues. Border and border security. It gets so much attention, such a big issue nationally and in southern Arizona. But I investigated a part of border security that doesn't get a lot of attention and actually happens miles from this border fence. Immigration checkpoints. They are a fact of life for all of us who live in southern Arizona. I dug deeper to see if, in fact, they are pointless checkpoints.
We've been stopped on 4 different occasions going through, so it's just terrible inconvenience. She is 16.
Kurt Rogers has lived in Santa Cruz County for 25 years. His backyard looks to the scenic mountains, but looming 2,000 feet from his front door is the immigration checkpoint on I-19.
Angered, frustrated, annoyed, and I will tell anybody that's willing to listen that I'm opposed to it. And I'm for security. I am for security, but put it on the border where it belongs.
Thousands of people in southern Arizona share Kurt's day-to-day reality.
Hi.
Answering questions, having dogs sniff around your car. Amidst our area's beauty, checkpoints are always on the horizon. About a dozen dot our state, most in southern Arizona. Customs and Border Protection put them in about a decade ago as a tool to help deal with illegal immigration and drugs.
My vehicle in the past has been searched twice without my consent.
Peter Reagan lives in the quaint town of Arivaca. He has no choice but to go through the checkpoint on Arivaca Road, sometimes several times a day.
We have to go through this checkpoint whenever we go to do any major things in our lives, to go to a supermarket, to go to a bank, to get building materials and supplies, even to do laundry for a lot of people. We have to go through there. We feel it criminalizes us.
The Border Patrol admits it is a pain for U.S. citizens to get stopped in this traffic or to have to answer questions at these checkpoints. But they say the checkpoints are critical to their #1 goal, and that is stopping illegal immigration. But I looked into the numbers and I found there's a different #1. Only 1% of all undocumented immigrants who are caught in the Tucson sector are actually caught at these checkpoints. I studied this report that comes from the government's own accounting office and looked over checkpoint data from 2013 to 16. It's here in black and white. 99% of all illegal immigrant arrests come away from the checkpoints, and that number could be even higher because of data inconsistencies. In a recent federal court case here in Tucson about checkpoints, a Border Patrol official said at the checkpoint on State Route 86, west of 3 Points, no undocumented immigrants were arrested in a 6-month period in 2015 and 16.
Regardless of your political persuasion, as Americans, we should all expect that we're getting what we pay for as taxpayers.
I showed the report to Billy Peart of the ACLU. He's involved in a lawsuit arguing the rights of people to protest at the checkpoints, but says this data should put up alarms for all of us, including those who believe strongly in border security.
I think the average taxpayer thinks and expects that Border Patrol is keeping us safe, that they are protecting our national sovereignty, if that's what you believe needs to be done. But I don't think the average taxpayer expects that a large portion of Border Patrol resources in southern Arizona and across the borderlands are using their resources to enforce small marijuana possession.
In fact, while border agents make a lot of big drug busts, those usually happen away from the checkpoints. 40% of the people arrested here are American citizens busted for small amounts of marijuana. Border agents effectively become DEA agents. In court, Border Patrol has said it, quote, does not use arrest statistics to determine the primary purpose of the checkpoint, end quote. There's a deterrent factor. Checkpoints are one part of their overall strategy. Rogers says the numbers prove that strategy needs to change.
I'm amazed by those numbers. I don't see how that keeps the people up here. They should be down where they belong, on the border.
I showed my investigation to both Democrat Raul Grijalva and Republican Martha McSally. They actually agreed. They both said that immigration checkpoints don't work. But they also said they don't think anything will change until a big bill gets done that talks about border security and immigration, and nobody knows when that might happen.
Dozens of you have been calling our Investigates team about this, and months after our story aired, trouble keeps coming for Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital in Tucson. In May, our investigation exposed the facility as having the most citations and the most severe citations for a psychiatric hospital in the state. After that report aired, the CEO was out. Now, with the new CEO leading the charge, the violations keep piling up. We'll tell you what we just uncovered as KOLD Investigates special continues.
Thanks for staying with KOLD Investigates. As we continue, a story that sparked outrage from a lot of you. A hospital with so many violations, it stands out compared to the rest of the state.
At the time of our investigation, Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital already had more than 80 citations. Our Wendy Redmond has been staying on top of this story for months now. And Wendy, the trouble isn't over.
No, unfortunately, it is not. They have been dinged again. The alarming numbers in just a moment, but first, I want to show you what prompted our investigation in the first place. Chase Vance was a young lady with an eye for art. Her family says she had a heart of gold.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
Unfortunately, Chase did not get to see many birthdays. 3 years ago, she went to Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital for help. After discharge, she took her own life. Her family launched a wrongful death lawsuit. In court documents, the family claims, among other things, the hospital's negligent, careless, and reckless acts and omissions, including the failure to diagnose, manage, and treat Chase Vance proximately, caused her premature death. Chase was just 17. A year later, another death. This one was within the walls of Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital. Records with the Arizona Department of Health Services claim a patient was able to take her own life while in their care because of numerous hospital violations. For example, the hospital did not have the proper sheets that would break away under a person's weight. The hospital did not have the correct door hinges that you couldn't hang something from. They had a behavioral health technician with no medical experience and was in fact hired as a driver. The nurse was supposed to check on her every 5 minutes, but didn't, instead taking a 20-minute coffee break. It was then the woman hanged herself. A lawsuit names that patient as Tara Moon. And it's not just those citations. Of all of the psychiatric hospitals in the state, Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital has the most with 82. To top that off, in the last 3 years, it is the only one to have the most severe condition possible, one case of immediate jeopardy. A lot of questions about what's going on there, so we took our questions to Phoenix, to Arizona Department of Health Services.
When I'm looking at stuff from 2016.
I sat down with Colby Bauer, the Assistant Director of Public Health Licensing.
Is there a certain number of citations that you would consider to be a lot?
You know, I would encourage people to just not look at the raw numbers of citations. For example, you may have in a child care facility a lot of citations, but not all of those are particularly concerning.
What is concerning, as we dug deeper into the records, we found a nurse without a valid license to work in Arizona, a behavioral health technician who assaulted a child patient. We even found a nurse they claimed was drunk on the job. Then we found the most concerning of them all, one case of immediate jeopardy when Tara died.
If something's not corrected, a patient could be harmed any moment. That's called an immediate jeopardy. And what that means is our surveyors will not leave. They will stay there overnight. They will stay there 2 or 3 days. We will call additional surveyors in. They will not leave until the facility has corrected that issue.
Did the Arizona Department of Health Services do everything correctly to your knowledge of this case?
Yeah, I certainly believe so.
As a result of all of these
within the citations of this immediate jeopardy case, detailed notes.
The wording in this says that Chief Executive Officer failed to be accounted for. The hospital failed to ensure that patients' right. The hospital failed. It's very strong words. Does this mean the hospital is responsible, the Chief Executive Officer is responsible for this death?
So what those terms mean is really in our administrative rule set, we require that the administrator is responsible for a whole host of things. So the wording in there reflects that the person or the facility responsible did not follow those rules and allowed a condition to occur that's in violation of our rules.
Hi, my name is Wendy Redman. I work with KOLD News 13. I would like to speak with someone about the 80 citations your hospital has from the Arizona Department of Health Services in the last 3 years. After leaving multiple messages and no return phone call, we went to the hospital. I spoke with hospital CEO Connie Burnett off camera. I was told no comment.
You know, I wanted to make sure you guys had a fair chance to share your side and as we're looking at it.
I really appreciate it, yeah, I do. I honestly do. We did get some directives, so I just need to let you know I can't.
Eventually, I did receive a written response from Ms. Burnett. It reads in part, our healthcare professionals are committed to ensuring the physical and emotional well-being of our patients. We maintain a zero-tolerance policy for any action that could endanger the physical or emotional well-being of a patient or employee. Due to federal and state patient privacy and confidentiality laws, we cannot comment on any specific incidents. Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital eventually settled the case with Tara's family, but there are so many more patients who also lived through what they say was a nightmare at Sonora Behavioral Health.
It wasn't anything like abusive, you know, but it was definitely kind of like almost like an inmate guard type relationship. Like I almost felt more depressed when I was there, you know, just because of like the like conditions of like being left alone and stuff like that.
You'll hear from one of them when our KOLD Investigates special continues.
just going to kill myself to get out of here.
A woman we'll call Erica says she checked into Sonora Behavioral Health Hospital when she was 16. She was depressed and thought about suicide. Now, 5 years later, she works in the behavioral health field and has a better understanding of what proper care looks like. She says she should have felt like a patient, not a prisoner.
It definitely felt like I'd done something wrong, and I think the way that some of the staff treated other patients who kind of caused more trouble than I did, like it wasn't anything like abusive, you know, but it was definitely kind of like almost like an inmate guard type relationship.
She hoped to speak with a counselor about her feelings, but said that meeting didn't happen until she was being discharged.
Like I almost felt more depressed when I was there, you know, just because of like the like conditions of like being left alone and stuff like that.
Since July, the hospital has gotten 10 new citations. Shortly after the first report aired in May, the CEO was out. Now a new CEO is in. His name is Michael Tack. I called his office and spoke with his secretary, requesting an interview regarding these new citations. I didn't hear back from his office, but I did get a call from Sonora's Public Relations Associate Director. She issued a written statement. It reads in part, "The safety and well-being of our patients is our utmost priority. We have carefully reviewed these situations and submitted a plan of action. The Arizona Department of Health Services has accepted our plan, and we continually work in partnership with this organization and value their oversight for patient care in our state." Of course, this is a story we are closely monitoring for you, especially since it got big reaction from many of our viewers.
So Wendy, you just mentioned that we got so much reaction on this story. Was it patients? Was it families? Who was it that got in contact with you?
A little bit from everybody, really. We had former patients complaining, we had family members complaining, just a lot of people wanting to share their stories and their experiences. I mean, I'm sure you've heard some of the phone calls that have come into our newsroom. We've gotten tons of emails, social media. It's just all been streaming in, and this has been coming in since May. So it's been a lot to deal with. I haven't even been able to reach out to everybody in response to all of it.
What about current patients, though, Wendy? If someone's potentially going there now or could be in the future, what should they know? What should they do?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway for me from all of this is to really be your own advocate, right? So do your own research, be in charge of your own healthcare and your family's healthcare, really. There are a lot of ways you can look into doctors, you can look into hospitals, you can see their citations, you can see if the doctors have run into any trouble, you can see the nursing licenses. So all of that is right there at your fingertips, and I know it is a lot to get into. Our Investigates team has tackled this, and it did take us months to compile a lot of this stuff. But know the questions that are important for you to answer, and even just a simple Google search can also get you a lot of really easy answers there. If you want to get started, though, on your own investigation, we do have some helpful tips right now at TucsonNewsNow.com.
It sounds like, I mean, you've got more than a dozen comments here that seem to be a resounding, "Don't do this." How do you know if the organization you're donating your hard-earned money to is actually who they say they are? As our KOLD Investigates special continues, hear what I found about a relatively new group who claimed they had good intentions, but had so many of you worried about their actions. Many of you reached out to us when donation tables started popping up around Tucson asking to support foster families. While there are many organizations in town that do just that, they deserve your support. Our investigation found this one group was not one of them.
If you donate $20, you receive a coupon book.
People asking for your money to help foster children and families. Several aspects of this alerted local nonprofits.
Anybody has a cash bin next to it saying, please donate, that should be a red flag.
Red flags like that prompted a warning from a collective of foster care agencies in southern Arizona. The Foster and Adoptive Council is saddened to learn Southern AZ Foster Kids has been taking advantage of our community in the name of foster children. Not only are they taking from foster youth, they are taking from the public's confidence in the programs that really are making a difference to our foster care youth.
There's needs to help children.
Our investigation found the man behind Southern AZ Foster Kids missed payments, like one for several $100s to Funtastics for an event. Bruce Landau refused an on-cam interview but gave this explanation over the phone.
It was a misunderstanding, Greg. It was a big misunderstanding on my part. I did tell you, I would assure you that everything would be taken care of by early next week.
It wasn't quite next week, but Landau later settled that tab. But there were other worries. Advocates concerned about Southern AZ foster kids sharing pictures and locations of events for foster children.
It isn't about the money, though that's a whole separate issue. This is about the safety of the children. Truly, truly is. We are all concerned that he truly knows nothing about the fostering community.
Landau eventually shut down the donation tables in Tucson. Local groups tell me they haven't received any money like he promised when this story first aired.
If these foster facilities don't want us to do it, I even thought about it last night. If they don't want us to do events, I'll donate the money to the organizations that need it for the kids.
I'm joined now by Suzanne Miller with the Better Business Bureau and Miahan Fajardo from Grace Retreat Foster and Adoption Services. We'll get to the tips and what you need to know to protect your money. But Mia, tell me, other than presents and gifts, I mean, it's the time of giving, what do people need to think about when they're supporting groups like yours?
Basic necessities. Something as simple as underwear, socks, diapers. When children come into foster care, they come with nothing. And so a lot of times the foster parents have to get everything brand new for the child. And so while it's not as glamorous and fun as toys, it's something that we need year round. And so it would be great if people could remember that.
And remember to do your research is essentially what Suzanne tells us. If you're going to give, if you want to help, make sure where it's going is the right place.
Absolutely. You want your money to go to the cause that you care about. So we have a lot of scammers out there that are creating websites that are lookalikes. So you just want to be careful that when you give online, that you just go to the right site. And the other one is, making sure that you just, when you do your research, that you are actually calling the agency to make sure that the site is, because there's a lot of information out there, and so just make sure that you're giving correctly. And when you get unsolicited calls to give during this holiday season, everybody has that heart in Southern Arizona, and I love that, but you want to make sure that you don't react emotionally to those calls, because you don't know who's on the other line. It could very well be a scammer, and if that is the case, then they're getting your personal information and your financial information.
And like we saw with the donation tables, it was that impulse of, well, I'm telling you a sad story, give the money right now. So essentially, you can wait, is
Absolutely.
the takeaway.
Don't feel guilty because you didn't give right then. That's the big thing. That's the draw that people, oh, I can't just walk away. But do. I mean, you absolutely can, and you can give later after you've done your research.
And you can do more research over at TucsonNewsNow.com. We have all of these tips listed for you. We'll be right back.
Did you know beforehand that this was going to be such a big deal?
We assumed that it would be.
When our KOLD Investigates special continues, more inmates across the nation are taking their own lives. But it's happening here at a staggering rate. We investigate to find out why that is and why it's costing you money.
It is an alarming trend happening behind bars.
Suicide at the Pima County Adult Detention Complex. Not only are the rates skyrocketing, but they're even high on a national level.
So we investigated to find out why. I take you behind bars to show you how local leaders are trying to put a stop to the deaths as they throw millions more of your tax dollars at the problem. These are real images taken from the Pima County Adult Detention Complex of inmate hangings. Former detainee Oscar Pera says this didn't happen in his cell, but it did happen while he was locked up.
Stories of people trying to hang themselves and all that type of stuff, with their sheets and everything. Some people can't handle the situation that they're in sometimes.
This is unfortunately a more common occurrence here than it should be. It's something the county and Sheriff Mark Napier are aware of. Assistant County Administrator Dr. Francisco Garcia just took about 6 months to study the problem and compiled this memo.
The chatter that I was hearing from colleagues about
increasing suicidality in correctional facilities made me want to look at what was going on in our own facility.
In the memo, detailed findings showing completed suicides and suicide attempts at our jail all going up. In fact, the suicide attempts in the first 6 months of this year look more like our annual rate. If we keep this pace up, our numbers will be off the chart.
Did you know beforehand that this was going to be such a big deal?
We assumed that it would be. We know our environment, and we know that we have a high risk for suicide because we have so many people come in with mental health and substance abuse problems.
Not only do these numbers look bad for the jail, they look bad compared to other jails too. When compared to 20 other jails of similar size across the nation, our jail's suicide rate is more than double.
So why do you think we would have a bigger problem?
I'm not sure what the reason would be for that.
It's really hard to tell. I mean, it's hard to compare apples to apples. Simply because a jail might have 1,800 prisoners in it doesn't necessarily make it exactly the same as ours.
Now officials are taking action. Just a few months ago, the county signed on a new healthcare provider for the facility. They went with their #1 pick, Centurion. However, this move is not without controversy.
Going back to this new healthcare system was not the cheapest option. I pulled the reports. So you could have gone with your second choice and saved roughly $3 million. Right. So why was it so important to the county and to the taxpayers to invest in this?
Because I think at the end of the day, if we don't do a good job of delivering services to folks who are in our custody, it costs the collective us when these folks are released.
When you take a closer look at the 4 healthcare providers that bid on this contract, you can see Centurion is costing taxpayers about $3.5 million more than the second choice option.
There are going to be some people watching this report who will say, I don't want to pay more for inmate health care. If they want better care, don't commit crimes. What's your response?
These folks ultimately get released and live in our communities. Our neighbors are the folks that we interact with on the street. And it is in our best interest, in everybody's best interest, that these folks be served well in the facility and be hooked up with the kinds of resources after they're released to allow them to be successful.
So where exactly is your money going? I went behind bars to find out. This is one of the main areas where Centurion operates out of. This is where some of the inmates with the most severe medical conditions wind up, including detox. Here, they don't just care for the detainees, they also try to identify if they might be at risk for suicide. That's now something they really focus on when each inmate first comes in.
Well, now one of the very first things that happens is a mental health screen right in the booking process.
Other changes include blankets instead of sheets and smaller towels so inmates can't hang themselves. They're even testing out this new bunk bed.
It is totally anchorless.
It's closer to the ground and has no way for an inmate to hang himself. Even the hooks on the wall collapse.
Here, this is Mr. Luke. Luke!
They also recently introduced comfort dogs.
Oh, yes, baby, good dog.
Luke may just be the very thing a suicidal inmate needs to change his mind. But are these steps working?
This is an ongoing process. I don't think with a detention facility you ever spike the ball, do your victory dance and say, everything's so perfect we don't have to do anything anymore.
Sheriff Napier says it's just too soon to tell. More changes are on the way, and the county says it will continue to monitor the progress of suicide rates. No word just yet on when their next report will be out, but of course, we'll keep tracking this for you. Don't go anywhere. This KOLD Investigates special continues when we come back.
Thank you for joining us for this special presentation of KOLD Investigates.
As we continue to stay on top of these stories, we want to hear from you.
Yes, so tell us if you have a story you want us to look into. You can do that by contacting our KOLD Investigates hotline at 520-744-5290. You can also send us an email at koldinvestigates@tucsonnewsnow.com.